Welcome to Living the Smarter Science of Slim, where we provide a scientifically proven lifestyle for long-term health and fat loss by eating more and exercising less, but smarter.
Eat smarter, exercise smarter, live better. I am so ready for that.
Hey everyone, Jonathan Bailor back with another bonus Smarter Science of Slim podcast. Very, very excited about today's show. Certainly an issue that I think we're all going to be able to relate to, and something that I think it's going to be a great conversation because I actually really admire what our guest is working towards today. You've all heard of her. She's out there doing. She's well known. She's well known. She's the co-author of the rampantly best-selling Skinny BIT series. We don't curse on the show, but you've all heard of that book. And she's got a brand new book out called Beg, which is a radical new way of regarding animals. And her website is her name, RoryFreedman.com. Rory, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, Rory, I just want to get started right away with folks might be a little curious as to why you're on the show, because I myself, while I have all the respect in the world and completely support a vegan and vegetarian way of life, I am not one, and certainly you are a very outspoken and vegan and vegetarian advocate. But what I really like about Beg and why I wanted to have you on the show is I always loved when I talk to vegans and vegetarians and I say, why do you do that? And they say, because I have a profound love for animals and I like to do all that I can to support animals. To me, that's awesome. And I sometimes, I'm glad that you're celebrating that, because I almost say, why are we even turning this into a nutritional discussion? Because it seems like it's so much more salient to have that moral discussion. What do you think?
I think that, it's an interesting thing to write books and have them out in the world and existing in print and existing online and doing interviews and having those exist. And what happens is something very interesting is you sort of change during the process. And of course, 100% my heart is still with the animals, but I'm not necessarily bullying people and yelling at people that the whole world has to be vegan the way that I used to when I wrote my first book, which was, I think, now about 8 years ago. And, I've got a lot of friends who are not vegetarians, who are not vegans. And, deep down, secretly, I used to think that anybody who wasn't vegetarian or vegan was selfish and that they just didn't care about anyone but themselves. And that if they really cared about animals the way they said they would go vegetarian or vegan. And today, I don't feel that way. And, what I feel is that as an animal lover, wherever you are on your diet path, you can probably be doing more to be a better animal lover. And it doesn't mean you have to go vegan. It doesn't mean you have to become a blown animal rights activist. But there are just some things that we can do in our everyday lives that we might not have known that could contribute to a better world and a better life for animals. And it can be really easy.
And Rory, so what are some of those? Because I think we can all agree it's a amazing motive, and it's we should all be compassionate to the planet. We should be compassionate agriculturally, and we should be compassionate to people, and certainly we should be compassionate to animals. If we're not ready to take the vegan vegetarian step, what are some other steps we could to live a more compassionate life?
Well, there's so many things, but in just talking about diet to begin with, we can ask ourselves, if you're going to be eating meat, when I was a meat eater, I ate meat for every single meal all the time. I loved it. I was addicted to it. I thought it was the best thing on earth. I did not want vegetables. I just wanted to eat meat for every meal. And I think, if I were to be a meat eater today, I would ask myself, do I really need this right now? What does my body actually need? And if the answer is meat, fine, you can give your body meat. But if the answer is it could probably use some vegetables, but that steak looks really good, I think that's the first thing people can do who aren't willing to be vegan or who aren't interested in being vegan. They can probably cut down some of their meat consumption by just being honest and asking, what does my body actually really need? And if the answer is meat, fine, so be it. But if the answer is not meat and it's just because it's a pure taste bud thing, maybe you could skip that one time and have something else instead and really just give your body what it wants. And not only is that better for your health and for your body, but it's also better for the animals and better for the planet.
And Rory, what are your thoughts on certainly anytime we eat anything, something has died, but it seems like the more sentient the creature is, the more human-like the creature is, the more of a moral quandary that can cause. So what are your thoughts on, I'm a big fan of fish. Like I love seafood, and we always talk about meat. And I wonder also, like, what if we as a culture just started to celebrate seafood a little bit more? Would you perceive that? That certainly seems like a step in the right direction from a health perspective. What do you think in terms of a morality perspective?
I certainly understand the question. Unfortunately, what most people don't realize, and what I certainly didn't realize for a long time, is that fish feel pain. And I know it's harder to relate to fish because they don't look like, the beautiful, strong cows or like sweet, cute little chickens or silly pigs. Like, they're just not cute and fuzzy and furry. But fish do actually feel pain. It's been proven by many, many, many scientists, and they have pain receptors in their body. And the only reason that, or in their brain, the only reason that an animal or a being would have pain receptors is because they experience pain. So they may not grimace in the same way that we would think a cow would or a pig or a chicken would, but they feel pain nonetheless. So I understand the question. I also think we have to just be so careful with our oceans now. We're seeing time and time again that the oceans are being overfished, that the pollution is just at, record highs, and we're just seeing lots of problems with things that come from the ocean, and whether it's environmentally or from a health perspective or from a moral perspective, and these beings that are suffering. I mean, I go into detail in BEG and talk about the different methods of catching fish, and so many of them are just catastrophic for the ocean because they have bycatch, and what that means is they are catching non-target fish. So let's say there's a fishing boat company that sells fish, and they go out to just catch trout. And that's probably a bad example because I don't even know if trout live in the ocean. Obviously, this is not my area of expertise, what fish come from where, since I don't eat them. But let's say they go out and they're going to catch grouper, and then they only want grouper. So they throw out these huge trawling nets, and they catch millions of things in these nets, but maybe only 10% or 20% or 30% of what they catch is grouper. They don't take the other stuff and say, hey, well, we'll try to sell this. They just throw it away. So now there's all these other animals that have been caught in the nets that are now thrown away as garbage. So it's not like they just get tossed back in and they're fine. They suffer when they get pulled out of the water. They can either suffer from, in a sense, drowning because they're suffocating and they can't breathe, or their swim bladders can rupture from the pressure of going from deep in the ocean up into the surface, or they can get caught in the net and, get sort of disemboweled in the net, or they can be strangled in the net, or they can be cut and bled to death in the net. So lots of bad things happens to these other fish, and then, maybe only 30% of what was caught is actually eaten. So it's really just so detrimental to the oceans and to the marine life.
And Rory, certainly, it seems like with factory farming and with the fishing you describe, there's horrendous things that are taking place to the animal kingdom, and it certainly, I'm curious if you see a world of hope, because it even seems like as we continue into the plant kingdom, some of the things we're seeing in terms of monocrop, these giant, like the irresponsible production of food, either plant or animal, seems to be going a little crazy now. So, I mean, are there? It certainly seems like we could be a socially conscious omnivore, and we could be a socially conscious herbivore. We could also be an herbivore who, if we're eating these edible products created by the industrial food complex, could we be actually missing the compassion boat?
I would definitely agree that, there's lots of gray areas all around any type of diet. And I think that without question, whatever we're going to be, whether it's carnivore, herbivore, omnivore, that the best thing we can do is just do it consciously. And it doesn't mean we have to do it perfectly. It just means we can all be a little more conscious. And, again, like I said, I used to think that anybody who was eating meat was selfish. And, because of some of the new friendships I have, and just because of the passing of time and some other spiritual shifts that I've been experiencing, I've just been seeing that there is another way, that there are people who are eating meat more consciously than what I previously thought everyone was doing. And it's not to say, because I do need a shift in consciousness, and that, people are not eating the way these are that I'm talking about. And that's or vegetarians, we can all do our part in eating more consciously. But the topic that really just grabbed my heart and didn't let go was the animal suffering, and that's sort of how I chose to mold my diet. And then from there, when I first went vegetarian, I was like the kind of vegetarian who just ate junk and ate whatever I wanted, ate chemical foods, didn't care about organic, didn't care about health, didn't care about vegetables or fruits, or hadn't even heard of Monsanto. I don't know if Monsanto was even around then. That was 19 years ago. But just becoming conscious around animals and eating animals, something happened, and I started to become more conscious about health and more conscious about eating a balanced vegetarian diet, and then became vegan, and became more conscious about eating organic foods, eating seasonal foods, eating local foods. So, I think people can just be open to the journey, and that it's not an overnight change all the time. I think a lot of things just happen gradually, and it doesn't need to be perfect, and it can just happen the way it happens.
And that I love that you use the word eating consciously, because I sometimes, I know I've had this experience. Sometimes we've had individuals such as yourself, very influential vegans, vegetarians on the show, and I'll get feedback of like, oh, why did you have a vegan on the show? Oh, blah, blah, blah. Like people will get so rallied up both on the vegan and non-vegan side that, but everyone agrees. It seems that it's like focus on the like industrialized food production is not sustainable or compassionate for anyone. So do you see an opportunity there for us to bridge that divide? I mean, there's certainly a lot of paleo people, for example, that are all about like local and sustainable, but it's like we miss each other because of this other issue, which seems almost secondary to just that life of compassion. Is there hope to work together?
I think so, for sure. And it's the shift that I'm seeing in myself and in the way that I'm talking about the issue, the way I'm talking to other people, the way I'm regarding people who don't eat the same way that I eat or believe the same things that I think. And I totally know what you're talking about. And there's so much duality in the world. And certainly there's so much duality in people who eat one type of diet versus people who eat another. And I've absolutely, unfortunately, and regrettably been part of that duality. And I'm trying to not use dualistic language anymore. I'm trying to not be so rah, 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 look at me, veganism's the best, everybody should be vegan, it's the best, everybody should do it, anybody who doesn't do it isn't as good as me, and it's like I'm moving away from that, and I don't feel that way anymore. I feel that people need to find out what works for their body, people need to eat more consciously, and that also people are doing the best they can. So even if it doesn't look to me like somebody is eating more consciously, or even if I think, in my opinion, they could be eating more consciously, I have to love them exactly where they are, and I have to trust that I don't know everything, and I don't know what's right for somebody else, and I don't know what somebody's entire journey is going to look like. I'm only seeing one small step on their journey. I have no idea what their beginning to end is going to look like, and I have to just trust that they're going to find their way, whatever that looks like, and I just have to keep my eyes on my own journey.
Well, we're talking about conscious living. That certainly seems like a very high level of consciousness living, Rory. So I appreciate that. And one thing I wanted to highlight, because you are a leader in this movement. One thing I've really admired and learned from personally from individuals like yourself, people who are just so committed to this, is when and tell me, I want to get into the mind of Rory Freedman here. When you are so dedicated on a spiritual level to eating in a certain way, it seems like it's not to be very clear, on the outside looking in, it looks like it would be very, very hard to be a vegan or vegetarian. But people like you and people I've met who are dedicated to this cause, they get joy from living this. Like, not only is it not hard, but it's joyous. And it serves to me as an example then, where if we have a more noble motive than, say, being skinny, like if we have a more noble motive, we can do miraculous things with our everyday choices like diet and exercise. But we've got to have that more noble motive. And vegans and vegetarians, wow, are they a good example of that? What do you think?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think sometimes I've let that, nobility go to my head and make it self-righteousness as opposed to just trying to continue to be noble. But I think that people can be noble wherever they are in their path. Again, it comes back to that consciousness. There was something else that just got tickled in my brain that now I'm forgetting what it is that I wanted to say. But I just have to watch what I'm eating from a spiritual perspective and from a health perspective, and not so much worry about what other people are doing. And I've thought before, I was put on this earth to help animals and to veganize the planet. And, there's a lot of Messiah ego in that. And, I wasn't put on this earth to do those things. I was put on this earth to be the person I'm supposed to be and to connect with God and to walk towards God. And if I'm going to help animals or help people find their own way of eating that might be better than what they've been doing previously, that's great. But my real work is between me and God. And, that nobility, I have to say, for sure, changing my diet at the beginning was super hard. Going from, crazy Jersey meat eater to vegetarian overnight was really challenging, and it wasn't fun at first. And it took a lot of grit and determination, and, just digging deep with that compassion for the animals to stick with it. I didn't want to stick with it. I didn't want to be vegetarian. I was mad that I was vegetarian and that everybody else was still eating animals. And, it took me a lot to sort of get there. And then finally, once I was there and I was over the addiction of eating meat, it then became something really beautiful. And then the same thing happened again when I was trying to go from vegetarian to vegan. When I finally put down that crack pipe for my cheese addiction, it was really hard, really challenging. But then I thought, this is really beautiful and noble. I'm not going to make this poor cow suffer, living in this industrialized farming situation where she's having tons of babies over and over again taken away from her so that she keeps up with her milk production just so that I can enjoy cheese when there's cheese substitutes out there, or I can go without cheese. So, there is nobility, but, I just share that in case somebody is struggling and thinks it's hard and thinking, like, what's wrong with me? Why is this so hard? Everybody else loves it. Like, no, sometimes it's hard.
And just the key thing, Rory, which I want to highlight for all of our listeners is I like to, it's always good when we have examples. And sometimes someone such as yourself, people would say, well, Rory, she's an example of a vegetarian and of a vegan. But I think we can also say Rory and a lot of other people are an example of just how profound we can change our lives when we commit to something meaningful. And I make that point, Rory, because when it comes to eating, I got to tell you, it seems like so many of us are not committed to so many, like there's so much meaning in our food choices, but we're just like, oh, calories, oh, the number on the scale, like those are not meaningful. Like let's pick something more meaningful, please.
Yeah. I mean, for me, for most of my life, my food choices were all about pleasure, which isn't very meaningful. It's just sort of like that base, id that it's just like, give me pleasure. What am I going to eat and put in my mouth that gives me pleasure? And, for most of the beginning of my life, it was meat and sugar and garbage. And then I became vegetarian and thought like how noble I was in that vein. And then vegan, and again with the nobility, and then certainly getting healthier and healthier. But even now, recently, I've decided to take on, for now, I don't want to say forever, one day at a time, but just for now, I'm going to step away from sugar, all kinds of sugar for now, to see how that feels in my body. And I hate it already. It's only been like 2 days, and I'm just noticing sugar everywhere. I want all sorts of, today I was on some TV show in LA, Hills, brought in like hundreds of cookies and cupcakes and brownies. I just thought, you've got to be kidding me. Like the day I decide I'm not going to eat sugar, like here I am sitting next to like 400 brownies and cupcakes. Like this is torture. But I'm committed to giving it a try and to just see, and like you were just saying, like to have a meaningful goal of getting it to my optimum wellness and to feel what that might feel like in my physical body, and like that ahead of that quick hit of pleasure.
And it's you mentioned earlier the term, you tickled your brain. I'm so happy you said that, because I get that, and I've never been able to describe it as eloquently. You just gave me a little tickle in my brain, and it was, talking about being compassionate. I think one thing that's very important is, regardless of like whether you're vegetarian, non-vegetarian, is, there's another being that's pretty important, and that's yourself. Being compassionate to yourself, protecting your own life. Don't let, for example, I would imagine you would agree with this, you become a what Joel Fuhrman calls a junketarian. Like you give up animal foods, but you don't respect your own life because you're eating all of this synthesized, sugar, starchy, trans fat, and plant quote unquote food. Like, that's not respectful of yourself, right?
I agree. And I think, I've put the animals first for sure. And it took me a while to remember that there was a me in there, from like unhealthy meat eater to unhealthy vegetarian at first. And then eventually going, oh, wait. And for me, that was the portal to getting interested in health. Was the first shift for me was vegetarianism. And I didn't care about my health until after I had started tinkering around with vegetarianism. And then I thought, wait, I actually care about what I'm putting in my mouth. Whereas before I was just sort of a human dump truck and didn't really even think about what I was putting in my mouth. It was, again, just 100% pleasure-based. And, now I'm trying to extend that compassion farther out from the animals to me and to my fellow humans, and how I'm regarding humans who might do things differently, even wildly differently. I used to hear people talk about paleo, and I'd roll my eyes and I'd tisk and like, ugh, And now I'm thinking, okay, well, if that's what works for somebody, then that's what works for somebody. And, that's not for me, but that's what works for them. And I have to honor that. I have to really honor that and not think that my feelings and my beliefs are above somebody else's. And it's tricky. This is new for me, and I'm just still, even as I say it, I'm wondering, but what about the animals in there? And I just have to trust that there's a God in charge who's sorting through all this and guiding each one of us. And if we can each just listen to our inner God as opposed to the inner ego that tells us, eat sugar, eat meat, even if you don't want meat, just because it tastes good.
Well, Rory, I can tell you your efforts are not in vain, if for no other reason for one person, and that's myself. I didn't plan on telling this very short story during our interview, but I have been so touched by a lot of things you've said that I feel it's a bit of my obligation. So I'll be completely transparent here. I couldn't finish Skinny Bitch when I read it for the first time for exactly the reasons you mentioned. And I was like, oh my gosh, I finally have a chance to talk to Rory. And hearing what, I began the call with one mindset, but just hearing what you're saying, seeing this example, it opens minds. And I think that while it's that struggle, I have the same kind of thing, because I'm like you. I have very, very strong opinions, but it's been my experience, and now I'm on the other end of it with you, and I appreciate that so much, is that when you can come with that open-mindedness and that spirit of collaboration, that's when collaboration happens. That's when conversation happens. And I'm just so excited that someone as, let's say, high-ranking as you is demonstrating that, because that's when real change happens. So on a personal note, thank you.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate your sharing that and acknowledging that. Again, as I said earlier, that it's a challenging thing to put something out there that's, in a sense, even if you're writing about like a tree, it's personal because it's you writing it and it's coming from your point of view. So having written about veganism and diet and about animals now in this last book that I wrote, Bag, you change a lot. And, when I wrote that first book, the name that we shall not say, Skinny Bee, 8 years ago, I think, or 10 years ago, was when I first sat down to write it, I was an entirely different person. And, now I don't regret that book at all. I think without question it serves its purpose. I think that it's affected a lot of positive change in a lot of people's lives. I just got an email the other day of somebody who had lost 80 pounds. So I'm glad that book exists. Does it make me cringe a little bit that I'm so different now than the way I wrote that book and the others that followed, and even the newest one that's out now? We're changing every day, or we're dying every day. So I'm changing every day. My work is going to sort of be out there in the world, and I might be different than it, but I can just show up today the way I am and let that be enough.
Well, and being an example of having that ability to change and evolve both mentally and spiritually, I cannot salute enough. So I appreciate that. And what is next? You have been on quite the journey here. What's next for you, Rory?
I don't know what's next. People ask me sometimes when I meet people, they say, what do you do? And it's like, I don't even want to say I'm a writer, because that's what I did, a month ago, 2 months ago, 3 months ago, 5 years ago. I don't know what I'm going to do tomorrow. Like tomorrow I could decide I want to be a violinist or a waitress or, a crazy person who lives in a cabin and doesn't talk to any other people and just gets hair down to my feet. Like, I have no idea what's next for me, and it's exciting and beautiful. And, you know, for today, I'm just going to continue to promote BEG, A Radical New Way of Regarding Animals, and hope that this book can just touch minds and touch hearts. And I do hope people will read the book, because I think there's a lot of really good, solid information in there that will help people become better animal lovers. And beyond that book, I have no idea. Maybe I'll be an astronaut. Maybe I'll write another book about something entirely different. I have no idea. And it's fun. It's fun not knowing.
Skinny astronaut. I can totally see that on the top of the New York Times bestsellers list.
Perfect. I like that. That sounds good.
Rory, well, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been an absolute pleasure. And again, I want to say, you know, listeners, please really listen to the show. I know we had a few connection problems there in the middle, but next time you want to argue with someone or yell at someone or tell them that one way of eating versus another is the right or the better. I mean, we got freaking Rory Freedman, the author of Skinny Bee, saying, open your minds. If Rory can do it, we can all do it. So thank you again, Rory. The book is called BEG, The Woman and Wonderful Example is Rory Freedman, and her website is roryfreedman.com. Rory, thanks again for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
And folks, I hope you enjoyed today's call as much as I did. Truly, I got to take a step back, because I'm like, whew, that went a lot different than I thought it would. So I had a little bit of spiritual moment as well. And please remember, this week and every week after, eat smarter, exercise smarter, and live better. Talk with you soon.
Wait, don't stop listening yet. If you like the podcast and if there's other ways we can help you, please join us in the Smarter Science of Slim support group, which is freely available at the Smarter Science of Slim website, smarterscienceofslim.com. There you'll find all kinds of free recipes and success stories and just all kinds of fun stuff, like how to help your kids go sane and just great community content.
And just one last thing before you go, if you wouldn't mind heading over to iTunes and up onto Amazon.com and leaving us a review, and then going over to Facebook and liking us, we would hugely appreciate it.